Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, another major concern reported for those upgrading to Windows 11 24H2. This one with serious security implications. Also, Microsoft warned of disruption to developers over the Christmas holidays due to a sudden, unexpected CDN change. And Apple gets hit with a large penalty due to allegations that Siri has been eavesdropping on its customers. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. A proof of concept exploit has been released for a since patched security flaw tracked as CVE-2024-49113, which was a denial of service flaw for LDAP. And it was patched alongside another vulnerability, CVE-2024-49112, which was a critical integer overflow flaw in LDAP2 that could result in remote code execution. So this proof of concept was leveraging both vulnerabilities in order to exploit the LDAP for nefarious purposes. The exploit has been codenamed LDAP Nightmare, and it was created by Safe Breach Labs. And it's designed to crash any unpatched Windows server with no prerequisites except that the DNS server of the victim DC has internet connectivity, which a lot of organizations, unfortunately, still run their domain controllers with internet connectivity. Specifically, it entailed sending a remote procedure call request to a victim server, ultimately causing the LSAS to crash and force a reboot when a specifically crafted CLDAP referral response packet with a non-zero value was sent. An attacker could use an RPC connection to a domain controller to trigger domain controller lookup operations against the attacker's domain. I figured I'd have this story at the top because even though these vulnerabilities have been patched, or at least addressed with the Windows updates, some organizations hold off on patching during the holidays as to avoid disruption. So if that's you, you better get moving on December patches right away, because this exploit is out there in the wild, so I'm sure cyber gangs are going to jump on this quickly. Microsoft is warning of an issue when using immediate support to install Windows 11 version 24H2 that causes the operating system to not accept further security updates. So this one has major implications. The problem occurs when using CD and USB flash drives to install Windows 11 version 24H2 with security updates released between October 8th and November 12th, according to bleepycomputer.com. Microsoft stated, quote, "When using media to install Windows 11 version 24H2, the device might remain in a state where it cannot accept further Windows security updates. This occurs only when the media is created to include the October 2024 or November 2024 security updates as part of the installation." End quote. The bug does not impact security updates applied via Windows Update or the Microsoft Update Catalog website, and does not occur when using the latest December 2024 security update instead. Microsoft is currently working on a permanent fix and recommends that media-based Windows 11 24H2 installations are using the December 2024 security update as the base. CES 2025 was held in Las Vegas this week. I won't go long on the announcements, as the primary focus for the event is related to consumer technology. During the week, though, Microsoft teased that they will be making major announcements around the Surface. So nothing concrete just yet, but a tease that some big announcements will be coming. Nvidia announced AI capabilities that will be coming to their gaming chips, and they announced their RTX 5000 series graphics cards. And they seem like they're pretty impressive too, going by the specs, with the top spec featuring 32 gigs of GDDR7 memory with a memory speed of 28 gigs per second, power of 575 watts, bus 512-bit, and that one is coming in at a cool $1,999. Now, there are other chips in the series that are considerably cheaper, and at least from reading the opinions of people far smarter than I am, it seems like some of those chips that are in the lower ranks could provide the same power as like the top spec in the current series for less money. There are also many other announcements on the consumer side, like a robot vacuum with an arm attachment that can move objects out of its way, which sounds interesting, but also a little bit worrying. There's a new range of microphones from Shure, and much, much more. Some really crazy gadgets, it's usually that have been announced as well. So I'll share a link to some of the announcements from the event if you'd like to check it out for yourself with this episode. So this next story, it's not really news, but it definitely caught my eye. I saw that a blog post that was actually published on October 24th seemed to be going viral this week. And this was a blog post from the CIO of Bricks Home. And his name is Philip Coulterman. And he goes into his view on a-hole software providers, basically using Broadcom as an example and going through how they cut their relationship with Broadcom short for various reasons. And he basically goes through kind of like an open letter to software providers on what they should and should not do. Like, for example, if your software isn't providing updates, like the need for software to materially evolve over time and provide more value, caring about outages that you cause, not using pricing models as a trap, and more. I'm not going to go through absolutely every detail of this. It's quite a long blog post, and I just encourage you to check it out for yourself because I don't want to take traffic away from Philip since he obviously took a lot of time writing this. But I'll share a link to that with this episode too. Over the holidays, Microsoft was forcing .NET developers to quickly update their apps and developer pipelines. This was so they would not use Azure Edge.net domains to install .NET components, as the CDN provider used for that domain had filed for bankruptcy. Specifically, the domains .NET CLI, that is .NET CLI, .Azure Edge.net, and .NET Builds.AzureNet.net were scheduled to be taken offline in the next few months, and that could break the functionality of projects that rely on the domains. This includes developers using .NET installers residing on those affected domains, organizations using GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps with custom pipelines also using those domains, Docker and script users with files and code referencing those retired domains, and more. Microsoft stated they were required to migrate to a new CDN and will be using new domains going forward, according to bleepingcomputer.com. It has also been reported that Microsoft bought the domains and transitioned across other CDNs, but admitted the timing of the change was unfortunate since it ran into the holidays and they needed to issue that warning. I saw Arnab Mitra on Twitter had also warned that if you're using Microsoft Intune to deploy PowerShell scripts or Win32 apps, you will need to grant access to the updated endpoints for your location, again, due to a reliance on this CDN in the past, of which the provider has now gone bankrupt. And I'll share a link for information for those Intune admins and also for any developers who may be using resources that rely on that CDN, so you can check it out for yourself. And I'll share that with this episode, which is episode 386, and you'll find that over at 5bytespodcast.com. According to Ars Technica, at least 33 browser extensions hosted in Google Chrome's web store, some for as long as 18 months, have been siphoning sensitive data from roughly 2.6 million devices. Collectively, 20 of the extensions had 1.46 million downloads and ranged from extensions posing to be for VPN, services, AI-related extensions, CAPTCHA bypasses, and more. Anyone who ran one of those compromised extensions should carefully consider changing passwords and other authentication credentials. And I'll share a link to that article too that has a full list of the extensions that were affected. According to an ITV report, Apple has agreed to pay $95 million to settle a lawsuit that has accused it of eavesdropping on people using Siri on their iPhones and other Apple devices. The lawsuit involves allegations that Apple secretly activated the Siri feature to record conversations through people's devices for more than a decade. The alleged recordings occurred even when people did not seek to activate the virtual assistant with the trigger words, "Hey Siri." The lawsuit claimed some of the recorded conversations were then shared with advertisers in an attempt to sell their products to consumers more likely to be interested in the goods and services. So, the idea that if you were to mention a certain brand name or perhaps a certain type of service or product in conversation, those companies would be able to have that information and then target you with their ads. So that was a whole almost like conspiracy theory for a long time. It's like people were saying that, I didn't even Google or search something yet. I'm getting an ad for something I just talked about. Like, it's freaky. And it turns out that, this was actually happening, it seems. If the settlement is approved, tens of millions of consumers who owned iPhones and other Apple devices from September 17th, 2014 through the end of last year, 2024, may be able to file claims. Each consumer could receive about $20 per Siri-equipped device covered by the settlement, although the payment could be reduced or increased depending on the volume of claims. Only 3% to 5% of eligible customers are expected to file claims, according to estimates in court documents, and those eligible will be limited to seeking compensation on a maximum of 5 devices. If the case went to trial and Apple was found guilty of violating wiretapping and privacy laws, the company could have been required to pay as much as $1.5 billion. So obviously they've done the maths and said, hey, if we have hardcore fans that own 5 devices each, but only 3 to 5% of people actually file a claim, maybe it's cheaper just to pay them out that $100 or less than pay this $1.5 billion. But seriously though, like, the level of intrusion of this is pretty disgusting, and there should be more than a financial penalty in my honest opinion, but this is the way of the world. And if you've got an Android device, I mean, I've had more Android devices than Apple devices. This is probably no cause for chest thumping, because I'm pretty sure Google were doing the same things, and probably Amazon too in that case with their Alexa devices. It would be interesting to see how many people do file this claim. During a recent call with investors, Broadcom CEO Hock Tan said that VMware operating margins were less than 30% before Broadcom's acquisition, but reached 70% in the fiscal quarter 4 of last year. VMware's operating costs are also lower under Broadcom, declining from an average of $2.4 billion per quarter pre-acquisition to just $1.2 billion in Q4. Also, VMware's annualized booking value increased from $2.5 billion in Q3 to $2.7 billion in Q4. Broadcom has taken a lot of heat for bundling VMware products into a small number of SKUs, or SKUs, but Tan said the company added 4,500 of their largest 10,000 customers to VMware Cloud Foundation platform. Broadcom expects VMware revenue to grow 41% year-on-year to $6.5 billion in Q1 of 2025, and an ABV to reach $3 billion. Broadcom's recent $1 trillion valuation is largely related to Broadcom's expectations of AI representing $60 billion to $90 billion in revenue to come in 2027. So yeah, it's interesting. They're making the claim about the move to VMware Cloud Foundation platform, but yes, I mean, there were a lot of customers who were feeling stuck because they had a considerable amount of their infrastructure running VMware, and they had no choice, or they felt like they had no choice, but to make that lateral move to VMware Cloud Foundation platform, which encompasses a lot of the different SKUs that were previously available to customers. So that one, I feel like that's a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, it's not false, but I think it's misrepresentative to make that huge claim. Like, that's 45% of their largest customers, essentially. But you have to really read between the lines and look at all the context and nuance to understand that. But you can't argue with the numbers either, because their valuation and performance speaks for itself. The strategy for the company is obviously paying dividends, and this is likely why they've made the moves that they have. They are obviously squeezing as much profit and money out of this venture as possible. Whether that's necessarily going to be a good thing for the customers or not remains to be seen. Interestingly, the Register has reported that Microsoft has delayed phase 2 of one of its new data centers in Wisconsin. Microsoft has said the build is now under design review as it evaluates how new technologies may impact its data center design. Microsoft added that the review process may include the need to renegotiate some building permits, potentially placing another hurdle in the way of the project, and they expect a delay of several months. They said in the meantime, their commitment to and construction of the planned data center campus continues. So interesting, obviously, with the advent of so many AI technologies, it may change the design needs for some of their data centers going forward. Potentially, this is why there's a pause in the construction efforts. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has proposed updates to the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, or as everyone in the U.S. knows it, HIPAA. And this is to secure patients' health data following a surge in massive healthcare data leaks. These stricter cybersecurity rules, according to bleepcomputer.com, that have been proposed by the HHS Office of Civil Rights, are expected to be published as final within the next 60 days. And they would require healthcare organizations to encrypt protected health information, or PHI, implement multi-factor authentication, and segment their networks to make it harder for attackers to move laterally through them. Now, I worked for a few different healthcare organizations in the US before I moved back to Ireland, and everything they talk about, multi-factor authentication, network segmentation, these are things that at least the organizations I worked in did as standard, but yeah, it's a good idea to enforce that standard across all healthcare organizations. The White House's Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technologies also told reporters that the HIPAA cybersecurity rule updates were prompted by ransomware attacks and massive breaches that have affected hospitals and Americans in recent years, adding that implementing these rules would cost roughly $9 billion in the first year and over $6 billion during the following 4 years. Recently, one of the largest private U.S. healthcare systems, Ascension, notified nearly 5.6 million of its customers that their personal and health data was stolen in a May ransomware attack. After the cyber attack, Ascension employees were forced to keep track of medications and procedures on paper because patients' electronic records were no longer accessible. The healthcare company also had to take some devices offline and divert emergency medical services to other healthcare units to prevent triage delays. So, I mean, if you listen to this podcast regularly, you'll have heard me talk about all kinds of cyber attacks, but they're particularly heinous when it affects healthcare settings. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good idea to have a set standard for healthcare, and this makes a whole lot of sense. And there should be some liability on healthcare organizations who suffer an attack and have not met that standard, in my opinion. It has been an active few weeks in the AI space, which, of course, that seems to have been the theme for the last couple of years. But OpenAI has outlined its plans to revamp its structure, saying that it will create a public benefit corporation to make it easier to raise more capital than they'd imagined and remove restrictions imposed on the company by its current non-profit parent company. Under the proposed plan, OpenAI would become a Delaware-based public benefit corporation, or PBC. And from what I understand, OpenAI already has a for-profit arm in its operations that was created back in 2019, but the parent company has remained thus far a non-profit organization. So this change that's going to occur is going to flip the parent company to a public benefit corporation instead of a non-profit. And a public benefit corporation is a type of for-profit corporate entity whose goals include making a positive impact on society. The benefit corporation legislation ensures that a director is required to consider other public benefits in addition to profit, preventing shareholders from using a drop in stock value as evidence for dismissal or a lawsuit against the corporation. Transparency provisions require benefit corporations to publish annual benefit reports of their social and environmental performance using a comprehensive, credible, independent, and transparent third-party standard, according to a definition that I pulled up on what a PBC is. Now, while this is the case from what I could see, the enforcement and oversight of such corporations is sketchy at best. So this could just be window dressing by OpenAI. Its plans to create a PBC would align the startup with rivals such as Anthropic and Elon Musk's xAI, which uses a similar structure and recently raised billions in funding. OpenAI stated, quote, "We once again need to raise more capital than we'd imagined. Investors want to back us, but at this scale of capital need conventional equity and less structural bespokeness. The hundreds of billions of dollars that major companies are now investing into AI development show what it will really take for OpenAI to continue pursuing the mission." End quote. So, yay. So don't expect AI investment to slow down any. Speaking of AI and public good, TechCrunch.com has pointed out that OpenAI failed to deliver its opt-out tool that it had promised by 2025. It is now obviously 2025, and the tool for creators to choose if they want their works to be included in or excluded from AI is yet to come. In more bad news for OpenAI, ChatGPT and Sora went down for a second time in December towards the end of the month, with the outage lasting several hours. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman announced that their latest reasoning models, O3 and O3 Mini, which build upon the O1 models launched last year, and the new models are already available for public safety testing, so not yet generally available, but have already entered the testing phase. The models use what OpenAI calls private chain of thought, where the model pauses to examine its internal dialogue and plan ahead before responding, which you might call simulated reasoning, a form of AI that goes beyond basic large language models. Sam Altman called out his company for being horrible at naming products, which, honestly, reading that, I feel that in my soul, at least from my experience working for vendors. And he pointed out that these models will be O3 rather than O2, even though, obviously, if you're going by sequence, it should be from O1 to O2, but they're going to go to O3 as to avoid conflicting with the name of the British telecom company O2. According to OpenAI, the O3 model earned a record-breaking score on the ARC-AGI benchmark testing, which is a visual reasoning benchmark that has gone unbeaten since its creation in 2019. In low compute scenarios, O3 scored 75.7%, while in high compute testing it reached 87.5%, comparable to human performance at an 85% threshold. OpenAI also reported that O3 scored 96.7% on the 2024 American Invitational Mathematics exam, missing just one question. The model also reached 87.7% on GPQA Diamond, which contains graduate-level biology, physics, and chemistry questions. On the Frontier Math benchmark by Epoch AI, O3 solved 25.2% of problems, while no other model has exceeded 2%. So already coming on in leaps and bounds in a staggering way here, or at least according to the reports by OpenAI themselves. In encouraging news for us mere mortals, the CEO of Nvidia, Jensen Huang, recently disclosed in a 60 Minutes interview that he finds speaking in front of large crowds, such as at the GTC AI conference, to be scary, explaining that he is an engineer, not a performer. So I think this is one that could resonate with most people. Having presented at multiple different conferences over the years, there's still that kind of bad feeling in my stomach when I speak in front of a crowd. And I know from speaking to other people who present at conferences that they feel the same as well. But it's encouraging to see someone at such a high level as the CEO of Nvidia saying the same. I guess it's just a completely human response. But now, this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up, the awesome DJ Eshelman has shared his guide or his document on Learn How the Pros Do IT Services, saving you 15 years of trial and error. So this is a part 1 of a 4-part series, and it is completely free for you to download and check out. So if you're new to IT and you want to get insight and learn from DJ's experience, by all means, check this out for yourself. And of course, even if you're a seasoned professional, if you want to see just how someone else who's got experience in the field feels about things, also check this out for yourself. And I'll share a link to download that part 1 for yourself, and you'll find that link at 5bytespodcast.com with this episode, which is episode 386. Next up, Ugur Kok has shared his assignment checker tool for Intune, and it features some beautiful looking reports and charts. It checks assignments for specific users, groups, or devices, displays all policies in their assignments, identifies unassigned policies, detects empty groups in assignments, and searches for specific settings across policies. So providing tremendous value, but also doing it with beautiful looking dashboard. Just before the end of last year, I saw the team at GoEUC shared their latest analysis, and this one was on evaluating the performance impact of Microsoft AppLocker. Now, AppLocker is something that has been around for quite some time, but it has been gaining in popularity in recent years because a lot of organizations have started to get more serious about locking down at the desktop and application level and not just focusing on securing the perimeter. Assume that attackers are going to get onto the machines because a lot of users happen to make mistakes and click on bad links and invite the bad people in. So you want to lock down within the desktop, within the sessions, within your application level as well. So a lot of organizations have started to implement AppLocker. It's a good idea to check out this performance impact report by GoEUC for you if you are using it or if you're thinking about implementing it. Over the holidays, I saw a really great blog post on transforming Windows Terminal into a productivity powerhouse. So I've been using Terminal for a while, and I always find it interesting to see how people are customizing it and how they're leveraging it. So you might be interested too. And finally, I saw a blog post about a recent Microsoft MFA vulnerability, and the blog post goes into the need to not rely completely on MFA, because if that becomes penetrable by cyber gangs and it's the only line of defense you have, you've got bad news. So you need extra layers, and this article goes into explaining why. So if you need to make that business use case to your management, this article may come in useful. But that's it for this episode of the podcast. Happy 2025, and I'll catch you next week.